Hey, I don't know how many of you watched or listened to the whole 2 hour thing in This Week in DUM. Yeah, RJ. So Alex and Gator like their format, which kind of, I guess you can respond with tweets, but the audience response requires the audience to actually come on, and that for me just doesn't have um the same punch as allowing the type of chat that that a normal stream chat does. But Alex doesn't really like that. And they have their 2 hour format, which makes sense. Look, people are busy. At the same time, it's like you saw how much there was to discuss. I was really holding back on so many things, right? Uh, yes, you and RJ, you and Jan God are pretty awesome, um, and the other people. And by the way, if somebody's watching on X and they want to come there is a link in the on the YouTube chat. Here, I don't know if this will work. I am going to put the StreamYard link I am going to try to put the StreamYard link somewhere where people, that's not it, where people can hopefully be able to see it. How do I do this? That's not it. On Media Studio. Let's see. Can I put guess in the. Yeah, the thing is with Periscope as opposed to Spaces, I'm not sure it works that well. Yeah, if you go to the YouTube stream, there's a StreamYard link for anybody who wants to talk about stuff more. But yeah, a 2 hour stream, and Alex is a really smart guy, as is Gator. And even with Gator not there, there were a lot of things that I could have. There's a lot of brains being melted on the Israeli issue because we don't have good discussions. We really don't. And frankly, it came down to the whole thing. Like, how was I didn't even want to get into it, right? Because what is exactly going on in the region in general, I don't know. Like, I also don't know. I want a narrative to be developed that is intelligent and makes sense of shit, right? And listening to Crystal and Sagar, it's like, oh my god, this is just so bonkers. And like, do I blame them? I don't blame them, because it's not a fully cooked, it's a raw conversation being had. And it's a very raw conversation being had. Just like even the conversation that we had about Ukraine. RJ, did you listen to the 2 hours of us talking about Ukraine? And we didn't, like, the last few clips that it was just there was we spent 90 minutes talking about things, and even when Lance joined, you know, it there was a lot of stuff. Limited hangouts. I mean, is that a limited hangout? I don't know that it's a limited hangout. It was. You mean in the sense that you have to be on X to be on in the space? Lance did join, yeah. Lance joined for a while, and he took the discussion in a whole different way. Yeah, I saw you in there, Sandy. There's just, and this has been what's been kind of frustrating to me, right? I don't think there's enough like intelligent, developed, knowledgeable conversations going on about all of the important things that are happening, in the sense that dumb people say dumb things, and why listen to dumb people say dumb things unless you're being clever. Young God, this is why we love you. Yeah. Look, Alex is not dumb. There's a reason why I developed a friendship with Dr. Rollergator. He is incredibly incisive. Hey, Lance. And like I love listening to him, despite the fact that we disagree a lot. Like, if I wanted to, I could have spent the entire 2 hours disagreeing with a lot of the stuff that he said. I was very tempted to play devil's advocate, and I mentioned it during the stream. I could imagine people listening and being like, oh, these people are crazy, these people. And if you were to take things out of context from what they were saying, and it was the same thing, when Lance joined, it was like, oh, this is a whole other place we could go, where I think Lance and I have a lot of disagreements, but I don't think Lance was being silly.
So everything I said would have been things that Scott Horton talks about and has documented ad nauseum.
I don't know Scott Horton. Who's Scott Horton?
He's a libertarian. He has antiwar.com, right? So his bug is he researches and talks a lot about, quite frankly, how, listen, the United States, we have to be honest, we've run around the world doing a lot of deposing and putting in different things. So the thing I referenced on which you took issue to with some of that stuff, he had a really good conversation with Glenn Greenwald. I think it was this last week where Glenn asked him, I think it's about a 15-minute clip about.
See, this is another thing. Like Glenn Greenwald, I used to listen to him a lot more than I do now. Like, he seems to have lost his mind. Aaron Mate really seems to have lost his mind.
So curious.
Carlson seems to have lost his mind.
Okay. So whatever, you that's how you feel.
Yeah.
Specifically about Glenn Greenwald. Now listen, I would just say this. It's the same thing, like you and I can disagree. Like, I don't agree with everything Tucker Carlson says, and I don't agree with everything Glenn Greenwald says, but I think directionally, here's what I like directionally about Glenn Greenwald. Is he seems to be pointing out corruption no matter where it comes up. It doesn't matter if it's a stupid term, right versus left, whatever, and I do think he's a real journalist. I do think that he has that sort of integrity and so on and so forth. But anyway, for those of us who've spent time listening, and I'm not a libertarian, but I find a lot of agreement with libertarians on a lot of issues around freedom and why are we running around getting in all these wars. And, we absolutely have gone around And we're fine with certain dictators, but then we're not fine with others. And just like, let's be honest about what we've done. And if to be fair, what you could say is the let's just say our foreign policy, they would claim that they're always picking the people that are in the best interest of good things for the globe in America, and that's why we have to do it. I mean, okay, right? But I'd be curious to say, and by the way, thanks for jumping me up to let me jump in there a little bit. What were some of those things in that section that you disagreed with?
Okay, so I think RJ put what I was trying to say more eloquently than I have been. When I say someone loses their mind, and specifically when I'm talking about a lot of these people, including including actually Sam Harris, uh, I think there are credible people who we all have to listen to the sources that we can listen to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like I think Glenn Greenwald or Tucker Carlson, or even Aaron Mate are dishonest in any way, or have ulterior motives, or being unethical or anything like that. I think they are fallible human beings who can only understand things so much. They have to trust the sources of information that are available to them. I think there are definitely motivated, and anytime you become large enough that people try to get information to you, right? There becomes this sort of audience capture, right? So for example, Eric Weinstein is somebody that I do communicate with, and I will send him information that I think is important. Well, obviously, I I have uh I would not even know how to begin to talk to Aaron Mate about the types of things that we need to talk about. We would need to have a personal relationship where he could trust me and I could trust him in order to have that conversation, because we're just so far apart on everything. His view on Israel is basically just anti-Semitic. He's become a complete toady to Hamas, and that's not because I think he's a horrible person. I think it's because he's so entrenched in a certain media environment, and what he's learned from his father is a person who has serious trauma from the Holocaust, and that trauma and his life story. I mean, you have to know about Gabor Mate to understand where Aaron Mate ended up being. And so there are situations in which just talking to a person short term will not get, but this is all getting way far away from. Um, I think you're coming at the situation from a position which I cannot. Yeah, that's why I used it, was specifically because of
I was, Barry Weiss.
yeah. Um, there,
Who's awful, by the way.
well, yeah, but she get her speech at ARC was one of the best speeches I've heard. She gave a great speech at ARC, but I think there are people who write, yeah, and that's another thing we could be talking about is thing. But going back to what you were asking about, I think the stance that you're taking to this entire situation is very different from mine, because so when Alex, for example, brought up the fact that like the he believes that Ukraine knew that it was a Ukrainian missile which killed the farmers in Poland. First of all, I'm not even sure about that. I'm
Yeah. But it's certainly what it is it's undetermined, right?
okay,
Zelensky can,
but
yeah,
if
yeah,
I were Zelensky, I would be making the arguments Zelensky does, because I understand why he would do that and why, like,
oh yeah,
he should do
100%. 100, and it's the same reason why they lied about
that.
the Nord
Nord
Stream
Stream
pipe. Yeah, it's the same
pipeline.
reason, sort of the same reason why they blamed it on Putin, right? Even though it wasn't Putin who did that, we all know
Yeah.
that now. But
Oh, look,
yeah,
we probably did it ourselves. We probably did it ourselves.
yeah, probably, right?
And
Yeah,
frankly, like I'm not so mad at us doing that. So this is, I grew up. So this is deeply entrenched in my personal history, which is that I was a child in Iran who came to the United States and had and saw the United States and would like to continue to see the United States as this white knight, which is a hero of the world. And so when we invaded Iraq the second time in 2002, was it 2001, 2002, right? Maybe 2003. What, I forget exactly the date, but I was like, okay, let's remake the Middle East, because I would love to see the Middle East remade, right? And that was part of my youthful exuberance, and I would like to think I am wiser and less deontological, although that doesn't mean, I hope I'm not being less moral in being in just recognizing certain things aren't as possible as people think they are, right? If it were possible, and this was one of the things I didn't engage with Alex over. Alex is like, yeah, Crimea should stay with Russia. I'm not sure I believe that. And I'm not sure I care to argue that. Right? I I I don't like
I do go to church with people who are from Eastern Ukraine, and they
yeah,
hate Zelensky.
right.
And because that whole 2014, that where we did topple the government, and they basically became very anti. They became very anti-Russian. Like these people weren't in love with Putin, but what happened is if they became anti-Russian, and quite frankly, the people in eastern Ukraine and the Donbass, quite frankly, they view themselves as Russians. Like they view themselves that way. And so, yeah, I want to just say, Jacob, you are like a lot of us. I was someone who was enthusiastically in support of, weapons of mass destruction. We're going to get in there. And then the thing that you
Well,
basically
I
I said,
didn't actually
well,
believe really there was weapons of mass
well,
destruction.
well, but forget about it. Anyway, people were enthusiastic. There was support at the time for that war.
Yeah.
But you were like a lot, and I would say the vast majority of people who would have been Republicans back then
Mm.
have now woken up to just the absolute failures of our foreign wars and policies, and are like, we need to stop this stuff. And and quite frankly, that's why people like Dick Cheney is hated now by the vast majority of the Republican Party. George W. Bush is pretty disliked by the vast majority of the Republican Party. There's been the realignment that you keep talking about. And it's not just a realigning of, let's just say certain Democrats over to some populists. It has been a withdrawal of a lot of Republicans away from that. Hey, we're going to be the white knight. Let's get out and let's get involved in everything. And then being naive that somehow we're going to be able to go in and create these democracies in the Middle East, and it's going to be easy. All those other sorts of things. It's just it's just insane. And so there has been this drawback. And here's what's happening. Like I would just say, and I did find I listened to that two-way quite a bit just to see. because they're not really down the middle, but I can at least see what the other side is saying. He paid for a pollster, and basically, and they polled people who had a really high opinion of Zelensky, which would not be MAGA, right? And so clearly, I was like, okay, this is a good cross section of some people that are probably really in the middle. And basically, they felt as if they want peace, okay? And this is they want peace and they want this war to end, and they don't like the way Zelensky acted in the Oval Office. And they didn't feel as if what J.D. Vance was saying provoked that. But I would just say, but something very obvious is happening. People in the United States get tired of wars, and they go back. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. We've had enough. Like, eventually, people might be supportive of, but eventually, like, this is no, wasting our money. People are dying. It's time to get out of it, and that's where we're at with Ukraine. Right?
Well, this is part of the problem, and like this is another thing I could have spent an hour discussing with Alex, which is when he was talking about how we have elections and Trump isn't bound by what Biden said, etc. Right? And it's like, well, if that's the criterion you set, that the world can only rely on the United States for 4 years at a time, right? Then that's really going to F us over as well.
It's nuanced, but you can't exactly. But it's nuanced, and what we're going through though is, listen, I'll say it again. I keep saying it on your channel. The EU is not our ally. The EU is not our ally. They are aligned with the progressive authoritarian left in the United States, which we just roundly rejected, right? And so there's a total reset. We are past the Marshall Plan, where the whole World War II posture has got to end. We need to find out the propping up their whole security state. Now, I get the argument, which is, well, when we pay for everything, then we have all the control. Yeah, kinda. We were getting robbed blind.
No, there was an agreement. I mean, there was an agreement which Europe made, which was, we won't militarize. We will let the United States have the military. And that's a whole.
Yeah, but that's decades ago. But I would also say the point is,
it is what Europe today, until Friday, what the vast majority of Europe thought the agreement continues to be.
Well, but Trump has made it very clear to them in his first term, and you can go, basically, we're 36 trillion freaking dollars in debt. They are attacking our technology companies. They are jailing people in their countries for things like prayer and free speech.
No,
we're no longer aligned with them.
I hear you, and that's why, like, I can see that side, but at the same time,
you're not making the case that you got to stand behind an agreement forever when things on the ground
I am not making a case at all. I am talking about let's see the situation. And Jan God, this is the thing. All of these discussions are discussions we could be having, and they need to be integrated into the broader discussion. Like, no, it is not a tall order for me to argue that Bibi is not a war criminal. My answer to you is very simple. There is no rational way that you can argue Bibi Netanyahu is a war criminal and George W. Bush is not. Right? Like, if you're willing to throw George W. Bush under the bus, and frankly, it's not just George W. Bush, right? You also have to throw Putin down that bus, and I could pretty much throw the entirety of the rest of the world under that bus. Like, so no, not a tall order at all. If you are focusing on Bibi Netanyahu, there's one reason you're doing that. It's because he's a Jew. if you're telling me Bibi Netanyahu is a war criminal, but Vladimir Putin is not, and or George W. Bush is not, you're like, based on what? Based on what? Right? And I mean, Sally, I would love, like, this is such. This is we need to be able to have conversations. I'm not fence sitting. I am saying, hey, we need to have intelligent conversations. And what, for the entire 2 hours, I was trying to make clear to people is we're like, the entire sense making organ has completely collapsed.
Right.
There is no sense-making organ.
So like one of those things, which is you will have the anti-Trump crowd who would be against any, they're going to be against any peace deal because if Trump wants, we get into this same thing where all of a sudden you would get people. So we need to move past this. And like, so like I would say with Sandy, which is an agreement gets old, it can be brought to the table again by both sides, not just dump it on one side. And so I think the reworking of this order which is, listen, we have a lot of interest to be allied with our European neighbors and to do smart things so there is peace and good trade and all those other sorts of things. And I think what you're trying to see with this reset, which is is happening in our country where people are at, which is okay, now it's time to reset those things. We will have deals with you, Europe, but they're going to be fair deals. And you need to pay for more of your own defense. And that's Canada's, everyone, they're all included in it, right? We are $36 trillion in debt. Our house is on fire at home. We have things that we need to take care of. And, and I think the one thing that Americans, I think there's a strong sentiment is we're tired of running around the world, being the world's policeman and getting ourselves sucked into all these, tax dollars when we can't take care of our own people at home. And I think it's a reset. So it's, I think, that's what you're going to see, what you're seeing with Trump. And, again, we need to hopefully have good relations. And, the problem we have, which is really what's happening with you were talking about the change to ARC, and Jordan Peterson said it very explicitly when he started it. He wanted it to be the counterbalance to the WEF. He basically, you saw this big globalist organized movement. He wanted to create something that was a counterbalance to that. And, at least for someone like me, pretty much everything that the WF stands for, I am against wholeheartedly. There are campaigns for misinformation and disinformation, which really just was a way for them to censor anybody who disagreed with them or their policies. I, for one, if I were from the United States, I think we should make sure that Romania should be able to have free elections and not arrest the candidate who was a populist candidate who was going to win and basically have no opinion on that. I mean, so things are realigning and there need to be new agreements.
But the ARC, so last night I went to a wedding with my cousin, my cousin getting married. There were, I'm in a Jewish family in Los Angeles. There were people who are actually quite influential that I was talking to. One of my cousins was telling me how much he likes Jordan Peterson. I asked him about ARC. He had never heard of it. This is somebody who had gone to a live Jordan Peterson event recently, and he had never heard of ARC.
Oh yeah. Normal people have not heard of ARC. Like nobody in my office. Nobody in my office knows what ARC is. Yeah.
Yeah, but this is somebody who went like recently to a Jordan Peterson live event to see Jordan Peterson, and he didn't know what ARC was. And like these discussions that we are having, right? Even the space that I just had with Gator and Alex. Alex has a pretty large following, right? Gator has much larger following than I have, right? The people who were listening, like, but these are, we are nowhere close to having the type of reach, and even Halperin with his two-way TV, like, that's not even on the level of Ezra Klein's podcast, much less. And
well, and they're just getting started. What I like about what Halperin was trying to do is it was very TLC like. He was trying to get people together on both sides, and the way he would say is listen. Even before that, listen to the other side, please. Just listen to them. That's what you were kind of what you're starting about this, and what you've been trying to talk about on what you just came off, and what you're trying to talk about right now is, guys, let's listen to each other. Have some, and not even the nuance,
conversation,
not even the nuanced. And so that's why he brings people up from the crowd, and he wants to get people on both sides. Hey, say why are you saying what you're saying? Why do you feel that way? Why do you believe that? So on and so forth. And then he wants people on the other side. What you'll find is, which is really interesting. So anyway, that's only been around a year and it's growing. And he definitely is he definitely has voted Democratic his whole life. There's no doubt about that. And there are things that I disagree with him, but the attempt at what he's trying to do is get at the heart of exactly what you're talking about. Let's have these conversations. Can you understand why these other people are saying this, that, and the other? So I would give him credit for that. And I just, and I particularly I just like to see how people are framing things and so on and so forth. So, people are making a lot of things about ARC. Like, I made this. So here's the deal. Like, as it relates to ARC, those are all people in the Jordan Peterson, the people that got invited are kind of within his sphere of people he's talked to and so on and so forth. Jordan is not a power player. Like, it's a little, even ARC is just this little mini Jordan Peterson sphere thing, which I know you appreciate, and maybe that'll grow. But when you don't have, quite frankly, people in the Trump administration and other people there, you're not in the game, because the game's being played outside of the people that he invited there for the most part.
That's Young God. I don't know if you're being sarcastic or not. Sometimes you say things and I just wonder if you're being sarcastic. And sometimes I take you seriously and then I realize you were sarcastic. And sometimes I think you're being sarcastic and then it seems like you're being serious. And while I understand that plays really well on 4chan, it makes it really, really difficult to actually communicate and take you seriously.
Young God, he'd be more than happy to have you come on and have a conversation.
Yeah, I think Young God's kind of scared about that. Yeah.
But I think you're right. And I see what you're trying to get at, which is, but again, we are at a period of time to where, so the famous thing that Halperin said, and he said it on the Tucker Carlson show, and he was talking about it because he was doing it. What he knew, and he said, if Donald Trump wins, we're going to see the largest mental health crisis in American history, right? And there was a little bit of shock in days that happened shortly after it. We're starting to see people get their hatred back up again, right? And you're having that mental health breakdown. And he mentioned like 25 or 30%. And I think that's true. But that's only about 30%. There's a lot of folks who may not even like Trump, but they're kind of in the middle. They do in their families. They don't watch the news. They don't really pay attention. There are people that just don't pay attention to that sort of stuff. They really don't.
I don't. We're not seeing the meltdown, and I don't think we're going to. So I mentioned this very briefly because in the whole 2-hour discussion, we didn't have time to actually discuss it. Ezra Klein has been normalizing Donald Trump to his audience.
Yeah, so that's one person. Have you spent any time watching these
No,
people lose?
Ezra Klein is not just one person. That's the whole point.
No. So he has some influence. I've never even watched Ezra Klein in my life. Okay. So the only reason I heard about Ezra Klein was because you mentioned his name and I looked him up. Okay. So I would just let you know. So yes, he has influence in a legacy model. There, make no mistake about it. But if you would look at the mainstream news reporters and their hysterics, and if you would look, so I have my mother-in-law she's losing her ever-loving mind every day, Jacob. Every day, like in full freak out mode.
So she listens to MSNBC.
And she watches MSNBC, CNN, ABC, NBC, CBS. She's in the main. That's her only outlet.
But
Outlet.
yeah, I get it. But knowing how those outlets function, they are moving in ways I didn't anticipate they would. Joy Reid lost her show. Joyanne Reid is out at MSNBC.
And do you notice who she was replaced with?
Three
That
people.
cross-dressing Eugene guy.
I thought it's a panel show now.
Yeah, and one of those is so there was a cost-cutting measure, right? Because MSNBC is hemorrhaging right now.
Correct.
And so, they didn't do it, and they, the point is like, it's going to be really interesting to see what the legacy outlets do because they have a 24% approval rating. Nobody's watching them. Their performance in the key demographics is just atrocious. And so they don't, no matter what they say, they're not going to move public sentiment. They're going to keep the whipped up propagandized folks, angry and in their deal, but they're not moving the needle anymore. Because if anybody trusted any of those outlets, Trump would have never been nominated, let alone elected.
Well, it's not anybody. See, this is the thing. Look, we need our elites. Our elites need to lead. Our elites need to have people need to be able to trust our elites, right? Like I cannot make no human being can process all of the information that it's necessary for our society to function. We could be talking about vaccines right now. We could be talking about Israel right now. We could be talking about Syria right now. We could be talking about Ukraine right now. We could be talking about so many different things, all of which are important, including Doge and AI. And I could go on and on and on. Right? We need sense-making organs of our society, and it used to be Ezra Klein, certainly for the past at least 15 years, but I would say longer. Ezra Klein was one of these people who steered the attention of the entire nation, and to a very real degree, he still does that, although not as much as he used to.
Entire nation.
Yeah,
I'd never heard of him.
Why would you hear of the person who's behind the scenes making?
So who is he? I'm curious because again, I don't know anything about Ezra Klein.
So
he was on PBS's
let me enlighten you about Ezra Klein. I am going to pull up the Wikipedia article on Journalist. Journalist, sometimes referred to as the J List, was a private group, Google group forum for discussing politics in the news media with 400 left-leaning journalists, academics, and others. Ezra Klein created the online forum in February 2007 while blogging at the American Prospect and shut it down on June 25th, 2010, amid wider public exposure. Journalists later pointed out various off-color statements made by members of the list denigrating conservatives. Others defended such statements as being taken out of context or simply a matter of private candor. Background. Ezra Klein controlled the forum's membership and limited it to several hundred left-leaning bloggers, political reporters, magazine writers, policy wonks, and academics. Klein justified excluding conservatives from participating as not about fostering ideology, but preventing a collapse into flame war. The emphasis is on empiricism, not ideology. Posts within journalists were intended only to be made and read by its members. Klein defended the forum structure, saying that it ensured that folks feel safe without giving off-the-cuff analysis and instant reactions. Journalist, member, and Time columnist Joe Klein said the off-the-record nature of the forum was necessary because candor is essential and can only be guaranteed by keeping these conversations private. The existence of journalists was first publicly revealed in a July 27, 2007 blog post by Mickey Kaus. Now, do you understand what I'm talking about?
Well, okay, so again, if we would look at, we're in 2025 right now, right?
Correct.
And we have a very fragmented information. People are getting their information in very fragmented natures now, much more than they used to be able to. There was a time where it was fairly consolidated. Now in a blogosphere, Substack.
Allow me just to correct one thing. It wasn't 25 years ago. It was 18 years ago. Which, if you want to say it was 20 years ago, really, no. It was actually 15 years ago. And guess what? It's still important. Keep on.
So the fact of the matter is, do we have, in a lot of the apparatus, do we have very left-leaning people? And so, of course, but it's just very clear that all of that has completely broken down because they have been making the most extreme cases that have been proven, all these hoaxes that have been obviously debunked. Nobody's believing their crap anymore.
I shouldn't
say nobody.
A majority of Americans still believe the Fine People hoax.
So actually, I saw a new poll that's starting to change. But yes.
Jacob has such a unique worldview that I start to believe that diversity might actually exist. I have no idea what you mean by that, Yon God. I would love for you to actually jump on and actually continue this discussion because, Yon God, you're like one of those people, like the prophet Zacharias and many other people who I feel like I would love for you to know. See, this is the thing. You're less of a Muppet than the rest of us. We're all Muppets. We have to all realize we are Muppets. We are, in fact, all Muppets. But some of us are more Muppety than others.
But I would say this, and this is why I've had this sense that as long as there could, be somewhat fair elections, that most people in the United States are living their lives. And when things get so broken, like what really happened, this acceleration of what they tried to do post-Trump, and this included like in the inner city, like again, I point out, I live in Houston. Trump won 30% of black men in Houston. An astounding number, right? An astounding number. Why was that? They had jumped the shark so much and then this opening the borders and everything that happened in inner cities and everything that happened, you can see, watch the city council meetings in Chicago. They just, people, the reason why is because it showed up in their communities, right? Just things showed up in their communities. It was obvious that things were wildly broken, and they were being told, "Oh, it's not broken. Everything's fine. Oh, the economy's great. You just don't realize it, but the economy's great." Like that lie that they were playing, you know. And so I think that there is this, and you can call me naive, but I do believe that if given the opportunity, and yes, there's Bernays, we're all subject to propaganda. I get that. And the propaganda machine has been able to hold on to this illusion that this far left stuff had any kind of support when in fact the country is and has always been center right, is kind of what the silent majority is. And so this realignment that I think we've seen that's happened, and has happened, um, has happened because it had nothing to do with Ezra Klein and what his people. Yeah, they've got their little machines. People saw what was happening in their real lives, and they're like, enough's enough.
I don't think you're naive. I don't think you're naive at all. I think what you're viewing is absolutely true. The control of the mainstream media has definitely been reduced, without a doubt. And Mark is pointing it out as well. Yes, without a doubt, the internet has changed our media environment, and I would say in a very similar way as the printing press changed the media environment that existed before it, right? And in a very real sense, you could say that the Roman Catholic Church was legacy Christianity, etc., and Martin Luther was the next wave, etc., and the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation, etc., right? But the Catholic Church didn't go away. And the legacy media will not go away unless there is somebody to replace what Ezra Klein did. And yes, Ezra Klein got together a large number of influential people to have a discussion among themselves about what the narrative was going to be in the mainstream media. And he has played that role for the past 20 years. And he continues to play that role. And I think it's incredibly important to recognize, hey, when Ezra Klein says something, publicly messages something, yes, he has less impact than Joe Rogan does. First of all, a lot of people will be shocked to learn that. At the same time, it's not nothing. It very much matters. And until there is a replacement, you're going to end up with the same thing, which was my whole point with the breaking points and the Sagar and Jetty and Crystal Ball thing. They are interpreting the news. They are understanding the news that comes out of the New York Times and the Washington Post, etc. They have no actual capacity. They don't have the experts. They don't have the institutions. They don't have the ability to digest the information. I have a question that I actually don't know the answer to. This is really funny coming from Jan God, because what he is admitting to is he generally asks questions he knows the answers to. Jacob, does Israel have nuclear weapons? I will tell you very well that Israel, whether or not it has nuclear weapons, is very, very wise in pretending it does especially because people believe that it does. Do I know that it does have nuclear weapons? No. Is it possible that they do? Given Jonathan Pollard and certain other things that have happened, it's possible. Am I sure they have nuclear weapons? I am in no way sure that they have nuclear weapons. I think anybody who tells you they know for sure that Israel has nuclear weapons, not likely. Oh, here I was thinking I was going to get a yes/no answer from Jacob. Yes/no answers, not likely. Exactly. You should know better.
All right. Well, hey, I've got to go spend some time. My wife and I'll probably watch a show or something. So figured thanks for letting me jump up in the roller gator thing for a little bit. Appreciate that, Jacob.
My pleasure. It was good having you. I wish there was more participation. I wish that Week in Dumb was larger. I've been very supportive of it because look, Alex is really smart.
Yeah, he is.
Dr. Rollergator is really smart. By the way, Alex doesn't talk about it. He has a PhD in computers, right? Like
I won't hold that against him.
There's at the same time, like he's not a full-time policy analyst, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We need to live in a society that has the strength of academia, the strength of full-time professors who are wise and knowledgeable people who have spent their entire lives.
We're a long ways away from that, Jacob.
Yes, I realize we're a long ways away from
it. We're not devoid of it. I think one of the things that J.D. Vance gets underestimated because of his upbringing and the hillbilly elegy and everything else and stuff and so on and so forth. J.D. Vance is a really smart guy.
Oh, I've been very. One of the things.
No, but that's good that they underestimate him. But he's a smart guy.
I mentioned this on the mainstream, which was, despite all of the stupid things that people say about Yon Gods, the meteor and the dinosaurs. Yeah. One thing I have been impressed with regarding Trump is that he's genuinely been getting smart people. He seems to understand the way any successful real estate developer has to understand. Look, if you don't get somebody who knows to be an architect to design the building, you're going to have a shitty building.
Yeah. Well, it's the simpleton is like, oh, Trump's an idiot and everything else. No, the first time around, he admitted as much. He was new to it. He had to rely on other people. But the other thing is, oh, Trump can't share the spotlight, which is total BS. He hire the very best people, empower them to go be great. He's done that. If you talk to people who have worked for him, he's very demanding. He has no problem sharing the spotlight and doing those other things because the reason why he can share the spotlight is he's always going to walk into wherever he walks in, he's going to get all the oxygen regardless. You know what I mean? So he can let everyone else shine. So he had more time to plan. And again, I think the greatest thing that happened now has been now in retrospect is him having them overstep the bounds with the lawfare and the craziness and everything else. It allowed more people to, wake up to what was really going on. And now he's coming in full guns blazing. Because if he'd have tried to do 10% of what he's doing now, the Republicans would have impeached him in the first time around, right? But they can't do that. I'll tell you, who shocked me the most of all of his appointments has been Marco Rubio. he appears to me, and I could be getting duped, but I don't think so. He appears to have moved past being a neocon, which was surprising to me.
I would not be surprised if Marco Rubio runs against JD Vance for the nomination, and do not be surprised if he does well.
Well, yeah, no doubt. No, I think it's a two-horse race right now. And we got to see, it's early on. It's JD and it's Marco Rubio. Now JD will be much more beloved by the MAGA crowd.
I would be surprised if Tulsi Gabbard does not run. Although I was surprised by her not running this year.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I mean, certainly you could see Tulsi. I mean, so at the point, the risk, which I don't know if it's a risk, I'm more of a populist now, by bringing RFK Jr. and Tulsi into the fold, is you now bring in, Democratic people that can now potentially run on the Republican side. I just think if you look at polling, and as an odds maker, JD Vance is the clear favorite. Marco Rubio still, when you look at the odds, is down. I think it would be a two-horse race between Marco and JD Vance right now. Now JD is much more beloved by the, let's just say, the MAGA crowd. But I'll tell you, if he keeps proving it by the way he's acting, it looks like Marco has left behind his neocon ways. And if that's the case, he's been pretty impressive as a Secretary of State so far. Now we're only, we're 40 days in.
Vivek Ramaswamy is going to be running for governor of Ohio, I believe. Right. Once Trump is termed out, there are a lot of people who might throw their hat into the ring.
Well, because
I wouldn't count Nikki Haley out.
Oh no, of course the Rhinos are going to run a Rhino. They're going to run it, but they're going to get stomped again. The Rhinos are dead. They can run whoever they want to run. They're not going to win. The interesting thing, I think, if I'm Vivek, who's still a very young guy, he needs to prove that he can win an election in Ohio. And if he does that, that takes him, okay, wow, you could win an election in a very large state. Impressive. He still has to do that. I think, given the closeness of JD Vance and Vivek, a JD Vance and Vivek ticket. Like if I would see Vivek potentially, if he's thinking about his route, with partnering up and being vice president with JD. You know what I mean? But the problem you get, he's still a young enough guy. The problem you have is if you lose and it goes back to some Democratic candidate, then everyone can be running 4 years later. If JD wins, well, now you're talking, well, just where we're at right now. Now you're 12 years out. American politics would say by that time, the Democrats would have some sort of reasonable candidate. America likes to go back and forth. So it'd be interesting what would happen. But yeah, the JD, because they're such close friends, that would be an interesting, Vivek couldn't beat JD. And if it can't beat him, then why not just join him?
I think they have very different views, and I think Vivek wants to be president.
Oh, he does, but their views aren't that different.
See JD Vance accepting Vivek as his vice presidential candidate.
Why that?
First of all, I think Vivek, just the whole H-1B thing, that was, and the way he spoke about it. And Andrew Yang is not, I mean, first I have to say, Young God, I really do want to know what you mean by that. Young God, stop teasing. Either join or don't. You're making me lose my mind.
If I'm JD, I wouldn't take Vivek because I don't think it adds much to his voting block. And the other thing you could see, let's just say JD and Marco duke it out pretty close.
Look, I think
at
there's one
that
way.
point you could see one of them, joining the other ticket. But at any rate, JD Vance is by far and away the leading candidate right now.
There is one way in which Jan God is making more sense than we are. The next election is 2026. We don't know what's going to happen, even though that's pretty near. The Democrats are still in complete disarray. The budget hasn't been passed. There's just so many things. Like the, I keep on having to beat this exact same drum again. I want sense making. I want to hear intelligent people talking about what's going on in like actual dialogue where they disagree and we can come to some sort of understanding and consensus. And like I was listening to this week or what was it, Washington, I listened to Washington Week, I listened to Meet the Press, right? I think that's what it was. There's these news shows where I am looking at a much larger meta question than people are looking inside. I am like, we end up talking about particular things which we could no, definitely not. That's not what I mean at all. Because
well, I think
what William Buckley would do is he would present the discussions that in academia were being held for a larger public audience. The dialogue wasn't happening in real time on William F. Buckley. That's what people don't understand. When you have public debates, when there are two solid positions which smart people are like, this is okay, like both of them understand this is the framework of the debate and these are the things, and then people talk about.
But Jacob, I would just say this, which is, one, we're very new into this, right? So I think the comeuppance and the realization that the current power structures got defeated in an amazing level, right? And those fractures are there. Our house is on fire right now, and we're needing to tend to some fairly emergency things. Over time, we have a good portion of our population who is stuck in a mental health breakdown, okay? And they're not good. They're cognitive dissonance. They're just, I don't know what we're going to deal with that, but you can't talk to them right now. There's no nuanced conversation you could literally have with them. Over time, Matthias Desmet keeps talking about this. Something will happen to break the fever, so to speak, that will break people out of the mass psychosis kind of formation thing or whatever. And I think there are some, like, I think whether it be Rogan or other sorts of people, it's going to happen on long form podcasts where people can start having those conversations. And that's where the discourse is going to happen. But hopefully, as we start moving further down the line, we'll see more of what you're talking about, right? But it's just, and I think people like you who want to start having those conversations, I think it's great for the people that will have those conversations. It won't be the progressives, the true believers, right? You can't have a conversation with them right now. There is no conversation to have with them. It's pure ideology. So have the conversations with the people that will have the conversations. And I think over time, I don't know where we're heading to, but we're just living in a world where just literally we're within the past couple of years where Joe Rogan was a New York Times subscribing, would never endorse someone like Trump, and he's just made the shift.
Okay, KL, you said this, and I was actually going to ask if Yon God agrees with this, because I don't understand what you're saying, and Yon God apparently thinks you do get it. So I don't understand what either one of you mean by this. Yon God is saying that if you're debating the next election less than 2 months into current administration, you might be a narcissist or really unaware. I don't understand how you would say
Right.
that.
And we were just having a conversation, which is interesting. But the fact of the matter is, we're in this really unique scenario of a new president who only has 4 years. The election stuff will start will be starting 2
Yeah,
years from
he
now.
started as a lame duck president.
Yeah, it's wild.
He started as a lame duck president. I mean, we're looking what, a couple
2
of
years.
years ahead in time. Like, you, how that is narcissistic or unaware, I don't
And
get
why
it.
does it matter? Why does it matter?
Especially the midterms. The midterms are not even 2 years away.
Yes.
So
Well, and here's why it matters now. So, okay, so one of the things, so again, they're talking about what can Zelensky do, right? One of the things, or people, or the EU or whatever. Part of the strategy is like, well, could he wait 4 years in hopes that a Democrat could win and they could get back to this or whatever? So the fact that you have the lame duck and with a brand new shift is, there are some folks that are probably trying to figure out, man, do we really have to go along with this entirely new direction that America's taking? Or are they going to get their crony establishment back in place in 4 years? Which in that case, we just have to wait this out, and then we can go back to, WF globalism plan A. I mean, so this stuff has ramifications now that people are trying to figure out.
Yon God says you have to figure out how to turn the intolerably insane NPC into tolerably insane NPCs. Talking about elections is insanity with all the zombies walking around. Again, I don't understand what you're saying. I honestly don't understand what you're saying, Yon God.
Anyway, I got to go. Thank you, Jacob.
See you.
Young God, jump in. I'll watch it. I'll watch it tomorrow morning. Mark will jump in.
Somebody's got to jump in. I mean, yeah. You know what? I am going to do a 5-minute countdown because I'm going to go get some food. Young God, I still don't understand what you're trying to say. Zombies talk and have opinions, and the algo will use their data. Think big, Jacob. You said you think about the meta situation or whatever. Don't understand what you're saying, my friend. And I want to understand what you're saying because you're generally a pretty smart guy. So I don't know if, like, I'm not sure me monologuing a rant will make anything better. It'll be more entertaining than me sitting here quietly. But what I really need is like smart people engaging with the information. And I have work to do. So I might just do that. And you guys can sit here and quietly listen to nothing. I am trying to make sense of the world. I am trying to understand the world in which I live with enough definition that I am not like wondering how the world is functioning. I would like to understand the world around me. You're always welcome on the stream, Mark. You know that. Although we do end up disagreeing a lot. And yeah, if I think you're not making a lot of sense, I will certainly say so. Mark!
Howdy. How's it going? Oh, let me move you because this is going to be annoying. Here we go. All right, now you're in front of me. That makes it better. I lost my dragon today. A major catastrophe.
What happened to your dragon?
I opened the door to go see what was going on outside, and the nail and everything holding up the glass dragon fell to the floor and shattered. And I was like, oh, now I needed something new on my door. So that was not good. That was not good. I think have you been listening, Jacob, to Carl Benjamin lately?
More than, I mean, he's been streaming more than he has been. A lot more.
Yeah, his last stream actually is quite good. I'm not finished with it, but
the one on Zelensky.
Yeah,
I started listening to it. He wasn't saying anything new.
Well, but it helps to get the, I mean, that he's not the 4chan people, but it helps to get the 4chan adjacent people worldview. He's so frustrating because he's so close and he's so far away. It's like, no, that's not how that works, Carl. But he's closer than most other people on sort of the meta picture, right? Like the way he was talking about the difference between Europe and America in that stream was really interesting. Because he was saying like he's using a new Greek word thymos, right? Which is, I mean, basically all they're talking about is intuition versus rationality, roughly speaking. He's just not using those terms, which fine and fair, but using thymos is a little too Harvard 10-cent word for me. But he's not wrong. It's just the framing is not close enough. So he's going to be in for a shock too. I don't think, if what he's saying is correct, then that lunatic prime minister of theirs is actually going to send troops to Ukraine. I'm like, if all of Europe starts sending troops to Ukraine, we should just pull our troops out and let Europe have their war. I've been saying this for decades. Like, Europe's going to have a war we should just get out of the way and let it happen now, and let them burn out. And I mean, because I just don't know what else to do. We can't keep supporting them forever, right? And they seem hell bent on war. They just, all of them too. They all want to fight with each other. They all want to. My empire was best. Your empire lasted like 10 years, kid. Like, no, we would have beaten the Dutch, or the Dutch would have beaten everybody. It's like, guys, you don't understand the world at all. And yeah, I forget who I was listening to. And Nassim Taleb. Nassim Taleb's been doing some stuff out of the American University of Beirut, I think, or something, some new university in I assume in Lebanon. And he was saying basically that the trading societies like Greece, where they don't go to war. They're all about negotiation. And he was making a larger point about the Levant and why the people there haven't changed, right? It's the same genetic group and stuff. And why they don't agree to war. They don't have the same number of wars, etc. And I think there's really something to that. I mean, I don't know how much I agree with it, but it sounded correct. I'd have to do some real research to figure out exactly what he's on about. But I think there is a difference there, and that is, so the way Carl Benjamin's talking about it. His frame is that the West, which now somehow excludes the U.S., actually in that stream. I was like, well, that's an interesting way to talk about the West. They're doing this. I would call it legalism, but basically rule by treaty. You might remember that from such great past events as the Great War in 2 acts, as causing all the problems in Europe before, was legalism on treaties. And he was saying that's the world they want. They want the world of rules where everything's stated up front. And I think that's probably true. And that's probably part of the larger trend of individualism. And because if we're all individuals and we can't count on the hierarchy and we don't know where we are in the hierarchy, that's the domicile Vervaeke talks about, then we need access to all the information. And of course, we can't handle, to your point, we can't handle access to all the information. And so now what do you do? Right? Well, the world collapses because there's a flood. And that's really what is continuing to happen. If we continue down the materialism, which basically forces you into the legalism and the individualism path, then we're pretty well screwed. I mean, there's really not much we can do to fix that. Because like we're just trying to do things that can't be done at some level. Like to your point, like we can't understand the world by ourselves, right? We'd be lucky to understand where we live on our own, right? Because it's that asymmetry between the distributed cognition that's kind of inevitable when you get groups of people versus the cognition of one individual to understand that larger brain, even if you think everyone's of equal intelligence or something, that the math fails immediately when you add, more than one person to the equation. And I think if you so one of the, did you read Peterson's latest book, the We Who Wrestle with God book?
I haven't yet. No.
I think probably look, it won't throw off much heat in the fireplace, but that's definitely it's the way it's written is so bizarre, right? Like, and I've been trying to figure out how to do a video on this, but like, he talks about biology in the weirdest frame of, and it's not only him, right? The weirdest frame of all time, right? Because everybody says like, well, from a biological perspective, it's in the individual's, best interest to survive. And I'm like, but you'd have to ignore all of biology to believe that biology is based on that. Because there's so many examples in biology of self-sacrifice, known, understood self-sacrifice, that talking about biology that way means you don't understand biology even a little, like you don't understand anything about biology.
Right. It's not an individual will to survive.
Right, but that's the way Peterson talks, and not only him, like Brett Weinstein does this too. I'm like, bro, are you?
That, I mean, they have certainly, when it comes up, talked about group selection, kin selection, et cetera, et cetera.
Right, but that's not the right frame. The right frame is that organisms have an emanated higher order principle that they adhere to and sacrifice their individuality to. Like, that's the way to think about it. Of course, a materialist biologist won't think about it that way, but Darwin knew that. Darwin knew it full well. This is what puzzles me. I'm like, did you guys read Darwin? Because I like, if you did, you really missed the whole point of what he was saying. And if you didn't, then you got the Cliff Notes version by, the same sort of retards who say Plato's Cave is about the individual breaking free of the chains and all this other stuff that absolutely is false. So I didn't, and that's part of the problem. Like, you want better sense making. I mean, people are still putting out videos about Plato's Cave and what it means, and they're completely wrong. It's the opposite of what Plato says, in fact. And I don't know how we're going to get sense making when people putting out garbage like that. Or,
well, I mean, the noise. There's always going to be noise. The question is, how do you get signal? And
right.
And I think the answer is hierarchy.
Yeah, absolutely. But the fourth estate already fell like a long time ago, 25 years ago. And that's really the problem.
I don't think it's completely fallen. I think it's still there. I think it still performs its function to some extent badly. At the same time, what bothers me is that we are not building the replacement.
Yeah, well, if you can, and I think that's the like.
Well, before you talk about if you can and how you can, you have to ask, do we want to? And
well, yes, except I think you're looking too low for the problem. The problem is nobody believes that's required at all. Like because anybody being above anybody else is tyranny, like automatically, and nobody wants tyranny automatically for some reason. And I'm like, well, that's ridiculous.
Okay, that's dumb. And I was hoping that in the Jordan Peterson sphere we'd moved past that.
Well, on my server we have, like, in my part of the sphere, we all understand hierarchy quite well, right? And anybody on Father Eric's channel
on my Discord as well,
struggling with that. Right now, and that's the problem is Sally's trolling me. I just freaking people. Shut up, Sally. No, I won't be Gavin. When you platform people, and I mean, but I mean, Peterson, I would put Peterson squarely in this category. Like, when Peterson is platformed, right? When you allow people to be platformed, however, just the availability of technology to low barrier to entry, right? When you platform people who don't understand the need for hierarchy, and I would argue Peterson doesn't understand the need for it. He just says it's inevitable, but he doesn't actually understand the functionality. He doesn't have any sense of the depth, which is why he started ARC. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Right? Because he's seeing.
I disagree completely. ARC is creating hierarchy.
No, it's not. It can't. That's part of the problem.
Why?
Right. Well, yeah, there's a couple of issues. First of all, the intellectual class should never be allowed to run anything ever, and we know this from history. Like, that's just a bad plan, right? The thing that runs things are leaders, and Peterson has already said he doesn't want to lead, and maybe he's right not to lead, because maybe he would suck at it. I don't know, right? I have no idea. Peterson also doesn't want to be an authority, and that's a bigger problem to some extent, right?
I don't know where you get that. I think it's very clear he does want to be an authority.
No, he specifically doesn't. Like, so you can see this all the way back in Maps of Meaning, right? So the remarkable thing, and I think the magic, although I think it's a one-trick pony, and we need one-trick ponies. I'm a huge fan of Maps of Meaning, the lecture series. I think it's the most amazing thing that's happened in the culture in 30 years, but by far. Like, I don't even think there's a challenge to that, but whatever. I'm sure plenty of people would disagree. I think the issue is when you watch Maps of Meaning, at exactly 0 points in Maps of Meaning does he ever appeal to his own authority in his own field. Now, occasionally he says, I know because I've been a clinician, but he never says, I know because I have a PhD and I have these papers. When he references papers, they're never his papers, even though his name's on them. They're always his students' papers. And so this is, to some extent, a very clever, I don't like talking about it this way, but I'm going to do it anyway because I think it'll be easier to understand. It's a clever weaponization of individuality to get people out of individuality at some level. And that to me was very significant. You can see Vervaeke copy this pattern, but what Vervaeke does is he just doesn't appeal to anything at all ever, right? He just stays in relativism land instead of doing any kind of citations. And I think that's a different problem. I got all kinds of issues with Vervaeke, even though like everything I'm doing online is Vervaeke for sure. It's owing directly to his meditation series for sure. So when you but even Peterson, right, it is a limited audience. And the thing that you find out if you look at Peterson, and you can look at the timeline on the petersonsphere.com website that I put a lot of time into. I didn't do the graphics, Sarah did, but
Peterson, I owe Sally an article for that.
Oh yeah, that would be great. You should do that. When you look at Peterson's like draw on YouTube, it doesn't matter where he is. So you can go to TED Talks. He's in the top like 5% or something because there's 3 tiers, maybe 4 in TED. I did the numbers real quick. I did do them. Like he's in the millions. Almost no one's in the millions, and there's a few that are in the 10 to 15 million range. But Peterson's, and almost no one's there with him in the millions. Everybody's higher, and almost everybody's lower. Wherever he is on YouTube, he had the draw. The thing is, though, because of sample bias, YouTube is very individualistic. I mean, that's where the people go to who want to be individuals and want to learn on their own. And so it's kind of a trap because they're always going to get flooded out by the world. And I think that's part of the reason why people know Peterson and they don't know ARC. A lot of people know Peterson and they don't know Peterson Academy. Aside from the fact that it's bad marketing, and actually I think this is still true.
And Peterson Academy, I mean, I spent the money, I joined Peterson Academy.
Mm-hmm.
There's no interaction, there's no building of hierarchy and community.
Right, because he's still a flat world thinker. I mean, for all his talks about hierarchy, he doesn't understand it correctly because he's still a materialist and he's still living in a flat world and he's still deferring to things like politics, which is why he started ARC, which is the anti-WEF. And it's like, but that's not how politics works ever, right? I mean, that's how we'll say the low IQ version of politics works, where there's 2 factions and they fight, and you know, in the marketplace of ideas, the best one wins. None of that is how anything works in the world, right? It's just the best, and it's a decent analog for certain things. So it's not like don't ever think about the world that way, but also if you're trying to actually understand it, you can't think of it that way because you're never going to understand the world in a binary, because there's nothing in the world that's a binary, nothing at all. Like I can't find anything. I've had a multi-year challenge going. Like, please show me a true binary in the world, and there isn't one. Like,
alive and dead.
No, because dead splits into heaven and hell at the very least, or chosen and not, right? And life is also not the opposite of death. And then that's the problem. Like you can't, like, we put opposite to oppose means to set against. That means the framer, person talking, does that to the world. That's not the nature of the world, right? And this is why more conversation doesn't help, because the more people talk, the more things they find to disagree on. Because as you talk more, the imprecisions, the errors actually increase. This is just a mathematical thing at some points, just raw statistics. So the more people talk, the less they will agree over time, right?
That's
and
not
so
true.
no, in the short term it works great. In the long term, it
No,
always
you're just plain wrong.
no, statistically it has to be true.
No, it doesn't, because
The imprecisions, the errors build up over time.
except that so does error correction. That's why it's a dialogue.
Where do you see an example of that? Because I would say the internet is
gave
proof
you
of
an
this.
example of that. I told you no.
That's not an example. That's a disagreement.
Exactly. The fact we had a disagreement is an example of error correction, where
that's
we were talking, and as we were talking, our understanding of each other went away from each other,
split apart, and it remains that way, which was my point.
Correction of
no, there's no correction. You just said no, and I'm not going to change my mind, and you're not going to change yours. And so that just splits us apart.
So now we understand each other better than we did before the disagreement.
Right, but understanding doesn't solve problems.
I didn't say, hold on. Okay, you are moving away from the conversation we were having, which was, you said, when we communicate, because errors pile up, we understand each other less well. That's false.
No, I don't understand your position any better, and it's not correct. So, that didn't happen. Like, I get the no, and I get you think that's a correction. It's not. It's just a disagreement, which is fine. But it didn't change the fact that we are now split apart more than we were before that happened.
I don't think we're more split apart than before that happened.
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, you've always been we disagree on a bunch of things, none of which you can ever list, by the way. But I've always found that interesting.
Oh no, I can list. I mean, I could give you many things we disagree on.
I'm waiting.
Peterson does understand hierarchy. Vervaeke does understand cognition.
Vervaeke definitely doesn't understand cognition at all. Like that's
like I
flat
said,
out easy to disprove.
We disagree on many things.
What do you think Peterson's understanding of hierarchy is? I mean, other than the statement that it exists.
Well, he helped me understand how old it is, how necessary it is.
Oh, yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So
what is his understanding of it, though? Like, what do you think he knows about it, other than the fact that it's older than trees?
That's a fact.
Yeah, I agree. It just doesn't tell you anything. You know, that's like saying the sky is blue. It doesn't tell you why or how the sky is blue. It doesn't give you an understanding of the sky being blue. It just says the sky is blue.
Now you're
in a fact.
Now I'm just hearing a semantic discussion of the word understand.
No, it's not semantic. There's a big difference between a description, an explanation, and an understanding. Certainly, like that's why we have different words for all those things. Like they're not the same thing at all.
So I don't understand or know, or I cannot describe the difference you think is relevant here.
Okay, so to understand hierarchy, we'll say properly, or as it functions in the world, even you can infer this easily from what Peterson says about hierarchy, from his description of hierarchy. And of course, I already know you kind of have to agree with this at some level, right? That means that the hierarchy emanated from something larger than the world that it's in. It emanated, we'll call it from above, right? The better frame is from creation, which is the core problem in all of this with Vervaeke and Peterson in particular, but tons of other people, is creation denial. Like they just flat out will not deal with, before there was nothing, a creation happened to create all the things. And that came from a supreme entity, right? Because we're already going to get down the stupid, being cannot create being garbage that Heidegger, being 4 years old, made the mistake of thinking, right? Like he doesn't understand that. And because he doesn't understand that, there's a bunch of things in the world that he
You
cannot
still
make
haven't
sense.
described to me what you mean by the word understand.
Okay. Hierarchy is older than trees. Where does hierarchy come from? Where does Peterson think hierarchy comes from? Because that would be a method of understanding rather than description, right? The source of something would give you an understand and a type of understanding of it. The fact that it exists.
So understanding is knowing the efficient cause of something.
No, not necessarily. There's lots of ways to understand things. It's just not the same as describing them, which is why understanding and describing are different words.
I do not understand.
Do you understand why the sky is blue, or do you just know that it's blue? Because if you just know that it's blue, that's fine. That's a description. It's not an understand.
Yeah. I don't understand how you want what your
why is the sky blue?
Understand is.
Like, why is the sky blue?
I don't know.
Okay, so you don't understand why the sky is blue, but you know that it's blue. That's a fact. That's a description, but it's not an understanding.
I mean, I'm just going to go with it. Although, I mean, I think, look, when it comes to qualia and like there's a whole.
I'm not even near qualia yet. We're like 7 steps from qualia.
Well, when you're talking about the word blue, you're talking about a qual.
No. Blue is a description. You can talk about the description all day long. I'm affording the description. Yes, there are descriptions in the world, right? Like my name is descriptive of me. That doesn't give you an understanding of me, right? You could say, oh, I know the name Mark Lefevre, but that doesn't mean you've ever met me, in which case you can't really have much of an understanding of me, right? So that's the difference between description and understanding.
First of all, Lynn, I don't understand why you imagine that everyone who's watching who doesn't participate in the chat is a bot. Like, what is strange to you about people listening to a video and not in any way participating in the chat?
They're NPCs. Leave them alone.
No, actually, I would say they're probably, like, a lot of them are some of the smartest people, because they realize there's no point in getting involved in the chat. They're just listening. I didn't say I want you to be silent, Lynn. I was just, you're pointing to something which, well, first of all, you're describing people as bots in a way that I think isn't correct. You are describing understanding in ways I do not comprehend.
So what do you think understanding is? Why don't you give me an example of something you understand, and I'll give you the description for it. Okay, and you can see that those aren't the same thing.
So I fundamentally believe the reason why we communicate is the reason we have words is to communicate with each other. And sometimes the definitions of people are different. I use a definition of understanding, which is actually rather limited. And if
what is it then? Just what is it?
If I want to really talk about understanding, I go back to the Hebrew word da'at, which is actually, that's knowledge. So understanding would be bina, which would mean to be able to take something and expand from it other knowledge. Which
Okay.
so
How does the sky is blue allow for that to happen?
the sky is blue,
That's a description. Yeah.
right? Okay.
Doesn't convey any understanding at all. It's just a description.
Hold on. First of all, are you agreeing that understanding is to take something and be able to
No,
expound?
I don't need to agree with it at all, Jacob. This is the funny part. But I'm just going to use your statement and show you the difference, because it's a difference. It's irrelevant that once you differentiate it, all I need to do is demonstrate the difference. I don't need to agree to your definition at all.
I really don't. Okay, this conversation is just I don't understand. I don't comprehend. Like we're getting into a whole thing of semantics, which is in no way like helping anything. I'm not. We're not having a dialogue. We're not, and I don't feel like you're conveying information to me. Is it? Is
Yeah,
it?
I'm not able to convey any information to you. That's
You're not able to
that's
convey
completely
any
retarded.
information to me. Then why are we talking?
Well, I thought you wanted to understand something, but you won't even agree to what understanding is, and so it's very hard for me to help you with sense making if there's no common definition for sense making that I can help you with.
I guess, like, we're both bald for a reason.
That's it.
I don't know what to say. It seems to me that when a person can, like, yeah, I'm just baffled by this conversation. I have no idea how we got here.
What sort of things are you trying to sense make about, Jacob? Since we find agreement on understanding versus description.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that we are in a world which is rapidly changing. The discussion. So this is a stream after a 2-hour stream where I was talking with Alex. I don't even know how to say his last name.
Whatever.
And
what things are you trying to understand?
We were talking about current events, including Ukraine. And for me, the important part of that was this is one of the things that's going on in the world. It's an important thing, which, first of all, a lot of people are talking about, and it impacts our politics and
international So what's politics. Confusing about Ukraine? Because I'm not confused about Ukraine at all. I'm just watching all this going like, yeah, told you so. I didn't even think it's hysterical. I'm like, of course that was going to happen.
What was going to happen? You knew
Zelensky was going to blow up in the White House because he doesn't understand the change that happened, right? And that now, I mean, in no way did I predict it would be public, because that's a little weird. Right. But I think that, what people don't understand about Trump is Trump will just believe you when you tell him things. Like this is how Trump Gaza came about. Right. Israel goes, well, really what we want is X. Now, whether or not that's reasonable or correct is irrelevant. Right. And then the people will say on the other side go, well, really what we want out of the situation is Y. And then Trump goes, okay, I believe both of you. The best solution is, and he's right about that. I think, unfortunately, both the sides that were saying what they wanted done with Gaza were lying to themselves, right? And that's why it caused a freak out, for example. And I think he's the same with Zelensky. He's like, okay, Zelensky wants a public meeting. We'll do a public meeting. I think it's a little weird, but whatever, man. We'll accommodate the guy. We like him. I mean, this is one of the things that Carl Benjamin was pointing out. Like, Trump's coming into this very, very friendly, very accommodating, very respectful. And then Zelensky's like, no, I want my way. because I'm a 3-year-old and it has to be my way. And Trump's like, you're in no position to negotiate. What the hell's wrong with you? And smacks him down because that's hierarchy, right? Trump's like, and Trump said it. You aren't holding any cards here. Without us, you have no cards. In other words, you don't come here and dictate terms in the Oval Office in front of the media to get points, which is correct. And that's what happened. And I'm not surprised that happened because, like, of course that was going to happen. Because in Europe, they think they know how Trump works. And of course they don't. They think Trump's an idiot or something, which is just hysterically funny. And they told him, if you stand up to him, he'll fold. Of course they did. And so, Zelensky.
How do you know they told him that?
Because they said it. Like, if you actually watch the European media, you can watch these people say this. So I'm sure, since they're saying it publicly on their media, that they're also telling Zelensky the same thing. Of course they are. They're too transparent to be intelligent about anything. And of course they are. In fact, they tried that with Trump the first time around and it didn't work and they didn't learn their lesson. Except, Carl points this out too. When Keir Starmer went to the White House, he did not make that mistake. Instead, he just lied his ass off the whole time he was there. And Trump accommodated that. Trump knows what's going on in England, right? He's been apprised. He just said, oh, yeah, of course you have free speech. Oh, sure. Yes. Wonderful. We agree. Of course he did. Because again, he's just going to be like, I will take everybody at their word and I will deal with them fairly, except I hold the cards. And that's what he's doing. And if you just map it that way, you can see everything that's going to happen way before it happens. Because these retards that are dealing with Trump are signaling clearly, loudly, and publicly what they think of him. And it's like, well, if you thought of somebody that way, what would you do? And it's just like all the stuff they're doing. And I find it hysterical because they're all going to lose because he's dealing with them honestly and taking them at their word. And I have found that strategy myself to be literally the most effective strategy of all time for getting rid of problematic people, because the snakes can't handle it because they're lying all the time about everything. And you're saying, okay, I'll give you what you want. And that isn't what they want. And they freak out. And like, this is the exact strategy that I used to use on BOM, especially after, even before Joey left. Joey and I used to laugh about it all the time, right? Oh, okay, that's what you want. We'll give you that. And they absolutely freak out when you give them what they want because that isn't what they wanted. They were lying. I knew they were lying. But I'm not going to be like, well, I know what you really want, so I'm going to anticipate. Like, I don't play that game. First of all, I don't have the patience for it. But I also don't think it's fair. I think if you're going to publicly signal that you want something and you can't be honest about it, you deserve whatever the hell you get. So I'm happy to play that same game. I'm familiar with Trump's game. I do it all the time. It's fantastic. I told people this before. Like, my strategy when I was doing consulting at Fortune 500 companies, I'd come into the group, I'd have a plan, a typed out plan, several pages. I didn't do emails, right? I might also do the email and attach the plan, but I would carry the physical paper into the meeting and say, here's my proposal. And inevitably, because this always happens, some retard would be like, well, I don't like that plan. You haven't considered blah, blah, blah. And I would always immediately step back and say, that you're absolutely right. You know what? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to have the same meeting tomorrow, and you can bring your plan, and we'll compare the two plans, and we'll even vote on it. Okay? Do you know how many times that worked? It worked every freaking time. You know why? Because nobody ever bought a plan. Not once. Not once. In 35 years, 0 people took me up on that offer. 0. It's an easy strategy. It's an always win or almost always win. And hey, if somebody came to the table with a better plan, we were going to vote on it. They could have had their way. I wouldn't have given 2 shits. I was a consultant. I had no skin in the game whatsoever. I was getting paid by the hour either way. It's a fantastic strategy. And so when Trump does stuff, I'm like, I recognize not all these strategies. I don't have all of his experience by any stretch of the imagination, but I recognize some of these strategies. They're very well known. There's whole books written about this stuff. If you read if you read biographies from successful people, you'll see these patterns. They're all there. And it's really no surprise. And I understand that people can be surprised, especially if you haven't seen what Keir Starmer and, Macron and these other clowns have been saying about Trump to their people publicly. It's all public. You don't have to, we have the internet. You can look this up, right? Then I can understand that people will be caught off guard. Just I wasn't caught off guard because I've been watching what's been going on in Europe. And I know a lot of Europeans, so that helps too. When you talk to Europeans all the time, you don't have to ask them the question even. You can just talk to them and say, hey, what do you think about Trump? And they'll tell you because they're loud and obnoxious. And then where'd you get that from? And they're like, well, my leader said this. And it's like, there's a press conference and they said this. And it's like, oh, well, that's interesting. So that must be what they're telling everybody because they're saying it publicly and all their people know it. And then it's like this stuff becomes abundantly clear, right? But if Europe is actually going to commit troops, Denmark and Belgium, and they're going to commit troops, right? And maybe the UK, they're going to commit troops. I mean, they're going to throw themselves into World War III, which hopefully, if we just take our troops out, we can let them have and see what happens, right? So none of this is particularly surprising. I think I would be surprised if they went directly into a war with Russia, since a lot of those countries have border disputes that they would settle tomorrow if they had armies. And I think because the Jonathan Joe talked about this, we're living in the myth of World War II, the mythos of World War II, where Hitler is Satan, right? And he had a bunch of examples. It's on his Clips channel, actually. It's only a couple of weeks old, I think. But there's a bunch of little tropes from World War II that we've been using, or at least the secular world has been using to do sense making, right? That's your mythos. And then that's all breaking apart because the lines we drew in World War II were largely arbitrary and incorrect. Not entirely, but like a lot of it was. And so that's not going to hold. Like the myth of World War II is coming to an end. And, if you want to call that part of the end of modernity or something, I guess you could. But this is why I like the Age of Gnosis better, because you could put something else in that place, which is the mythos of World War II or something is shattering. And its shattering is the result of the end of the materialism, right? And that's what Peterson represents, is the end of materialism. Because if you listen to Maps of Meaning really closely, you'll hear him bump up against materialism and say, hey, listen, logic, reason, rationality, science don't work for certain things. Here are those things, right? And that's part of the problem, is that he's not replacing them with anything. So he's not wrong. Like nothing that he said, almost nothing that he says is even remotely incorrect, but it's still massively incomplete. And that's the problem, is that we're still in the shattering phase of this. Things are not coalescing. I mean, I like Donald Trump, but politics is not going to solve the meaning crisis. And it's very much, it's very much the meaning crisis due to the intimacy crisis. And that's a much bigger problem than Europe or politics or war with Russia or World War III or any of that.
You're claiming to know things.
No, I hear them. I don't know them. Like I'm not making a claim of knowledge. I'm telling you, these people said this stuff. Of course, if you say that stuff and you act as if it's true, you're going to have this conflict. Like, it's not that hard. Like, it doesn't require a knowledge.
Aren't hard, which appear exceedingly difficult to me.
Well, but yeah. You also don't understand the difference between observation and thought. So that might be part of the confusion. I'm not making a claim of I worked this out in my head. I'm making a claim of...
You're saying things weren't surprising to you, which the rest of the world found surprising.
Not the rest of the world. Like a bunch of people that I know. We're all sitting there laughing. Like, I don't know what to tell you. There's a bunch of people, like quite a lot, like closer to 50% of the population than you might think, who are like, well, of course this was going to happen. Listen to what Europe's been saying. It's not, but some people are very open to observation.
No, see, this is the thing. Well over 50% of the American population wouldn't know the name Vladimir Zelensky at all.
Yeah.
You could mention it in conversation to them. And if you
they
said,
would
the president of Ukraine, they might vaguely know which continent that country might be on, and that people may have discussed.
So, like, Carl Benjamin's not surprised by any of what happened either.
Carl Benjamin is not your average person on the street. That's not.
And then everybody that followed him is probably not surprised either, and he has quite the following. I mean,
he actually doesn't. Vast majority of people have no idea who Carl Benjamin is, especially in Great Britain.
Oh, I mean, if you say so. I mean, he still
Mark,
has.
When you go to the supermarket, like, how many people in the supermarket in your town do you believe that if you said Sargon of Akkad would have any clue what you're talking about?
Okay.
No, seriously.
If that's the game you want to play, yeah. I mean, a bunch of people who don't care about Zelensky still don't know what happened and are never going to know. Also, don't know.
And that's the
vast majority of the population of the United States, for sure. Absolutely.
Okay.
But people who are paying attention at that layer of analysis, right? Most of them, I would say, are actually not surprised at all. That's not most people, right? But the people that know about Zelensky and Ukraine at all, which is not most people, right? And this is where the confusion is. When you get, I hate the Dunbar number, but there's something to it. When you get past your Dunbar number,
right,
the distinction that I just drew, most people versus most people paying attention to a thing, is actually meaningless to you, right? Because the numbers are already too big for you to understand. And this is something Peterson has talked about many times, right? And so you could say Peterson's not very big because most people don't know who Jordan Peterson is either. And most people don't know who Joe Rogan is either. And this is the problem.
No. For me, it's a big issue that yesterday I went to my cousin's wedding, and let's face it, the people who are at my cousin's wedding are far more important to me than the vast majority of the rest of humanity, right? These are people I've grown up with. These are people who hopefully will be showing up at my life events. Whose life events actually matter to me. These are the people who actually matter in my life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Of those people, the vast majority are not aware of Jordan Peterson or Sargon of Akkad.
Right. And they shouldn't be.
And they did hear, they watch the news, which is some version of mainstream news. They're definitely not on 4chan, right?
Right.
And they found what happened quite surprising.
Yeah, they probably don't even actually know what happened, but yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people, like, I watch people on Twitter that I know who were like, that was completely disrespectful. There was no reason to do that. And then 3-4 hours later, a day later, we're like, oh, I watched the whole thing. Zelensky really screwed up. Right? They switched their concept with more information. And so what you're bumping up against is filters. Yeah, most people filter out this garbage. And the way that breaks through the filters is through whatever, quote, news mediums they're using. And because the Fourth Estate fell 25 or so years ago by numbers, just look at the numbers. It's not a secret, right? It was right in the viewership numbers and the readership numbers for the newspapers and magazines and everything. It affected all mediums, right? All, we'll call them old style mediums or whatever. That happened, right? And people didn't go to the internet right away. That didn't happen, right? once it reached a critical layer, that the mainstream media was basically lying to people. People broke off and went basically, because if you look at the numbers, what happened was Fox was the fastest growing 24/7 news organization, for 15 years or something retarded. Like, it just, every year they grew. The whole market was shrinking. That's actually a very important fact. So in a shrinking market, they're growing. Wow, well, that's interesting, right? But what happened was they, before they blew up, right, before they got rid of Roger Ailes and completely obliterated any chance of ever having a TV news media ever again, at least for the next 10 years, those people who were leaving Fox, because Fox wasn't exactly being truthful either, especially for, especially when they lost O'Reilly. The minute Fox lost O'Reilly, those people did go online, right? And so the vacuum that was created by the destruction, the self-destruction in many cases of the Fourth Estate, got filled by the internet. And then if you look at if you were actually there and you monitored what actually happened, just to observe, didn't think about it. Thinking about things really screws up how the world actually appears, right? Oh, just all of a sudden, these online news things started to appear. People trying to build online news organizations, like, was it Rebel Media, I think? The one in Canada that Lauren Southern did, right? Like, because she built that other idiot didn't. And he left Canadian mainstream news to build a news network. And then Vice and, all those guys, right, who were trying to build these news organizations. In Vice's case, they were trying to do it on cable, right? But they actually met with more success online, right? Because there's other forces going on, right? People are cutting the cord, right? There's all this weird stuff happening around people. At the same time, everyone's complaining about hierarchy and tyranny. They're going with subscription services and leasing, which is really weird, right? You guys are, and renting, right? Leasing, renting, and subscription services. Why? Right? Meantime, I'm like, no, I want to buy every piece of software that I use, and I don't want any of it in the cloud. Everyone else is like, more cloud. I'm like, what are you doing? Right? And some of that's convenience and ease of use. But all of these things are coming together at the same time. And so in the vacuum of the Fourth Estate, you have this new news force, but it's not unified, right? And so you've got the crazy leftists, the Young Turks, right? And then you've got the Carl Benjamins and the Tim Pools, who are way more moderate than anything else, right? You have no right wing, because no right wing people bother with any of this stuff ever, and they never have.
Exactly. No right wing people bother with this stuff. And this is part of the thing. Like Sally says, Mark has silly cousins too. You have things in common. I have silly cousins too. I don't think my cousins are silly. They have kids and wives and lives.
Okay,
and
Jacob.
jobs
Let me tell you a story. So on Thursday, I went to Chapel Hill, North Carolina University, Chapel Hill, which is absolutely stunningly gorgeous campus. Like, forget about Harvard. Harvard's beautiful. I grew up in Boston. Harvard's gorgeous. Chapel Hill's way, way prettier. So I visited my cousin. My cousin has a PhD in this alleged discipline called sociology. My cousin this is my cousin. Now, granted, she was estranged from the family of her own choice. She interestingly converted to Judaism, so she's Jewish. It's weird.
I doubt very much Orthodox Judaism, but okay.
I have no idea. He married a lovely guy whose father I get along with quite well. He's an engineer. We had a lovely conversation at the pre-wedding little celebration there. Lovely people. But she was making comments to me like, "Well, you'd be really interested in my class," and I'm staring at her like, "You give one lecture a week." Okay. I took Andrew Ng's machine learning course, which is about 30 billion times harder than anything in sociology. And I did it in a weekend. No, your sociology course once a week is not going to hold my attention, right? I blew through Maps of Meaning in a week, right? I did all of Vervaeke's stuff, right? Like, nah, sociology is not going to even hold my attention, right? And we're talking about stuff, and I was like, because it became apparent to me she didn't understand the draw of Elon and why anybody thought it was okay to send an email to somebody saying what you did for the week, right? Like justifying your job. And I said, you have to understand that nearly every software engineer has to give, because they're using Agile, which I very much disagree with and makes me want to be homicidal towards everybody. Agile, you do a stand-up every day. You tell everybody in the group, including your boss, what you worked on yesterday and what you plan to work on today. And you expect those people to give two craps about you having to send one email in a week once to your boss? You're nuts. And she didn't get it. She still didn't understand what she did blink. And then she started to explain to me, well, no one does that. And I said, I've never worked anywhere, and I worked for way more companies than she will ever work for because I was a consultant, right? 3, 6, 10-month gigs, right? Everybody does that. Everybody. And not just in tech, right? I worked for banks. I worked for manufacturing companies. I worked in all kinds of industry. I worked in genomics for a while.
That's
right?
Salaried employees at for-profit in for-profit
and nonprofits. I did consulting for a bunch of nonprofits and a bunch of charities. This is not uncommon that people, and then in the conversation, she said, well, I've worked for a bunch of them, which of course she hasn't, maybe 3, right? And she said, oh, we never had to do that. We met 3 times a week. And I'm like, okay, but the government employees aren't meeting any times a week. Like, so you did do that. You just don't realize it because you're not making the connection, right? And like literally unable to make these connections. You're arguing about US aid and saying, well, that's not the BBC, it's BBC whatever, right? Some subgroup within the BBC. And I said, but you're using the letters BBC and then saying it's not BBC. And like she didn't connect it. Like she couldn't figure it out. And she's a professor at major university, right? And I love her dearly, but like, my goodness, like really, you can't, she could not figure it out. Like at all. Could not empathize or sympathize with software engineers. Have to tell what they did yesterday every day. They're not going to be sympathetic to somebody having to send one email to their boss at the end of the week. It's not going to happen. And she couldn't believe me. And again, challenging me all over the place. At one point, I had to say, what about Bogosian and Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose? And she went, oh, no, I know about the grievance study thing. It took about 10 minutes for her to figure out what I was talking about for some reason. And she said, but that was totally unfair. And then she went off on this weird rant where she said, that's dishonest. No, she said, if you were trying to be dishonest, you could do that. And then while she's describing to me this, she says, by the way, there's a bifurcation between the good journals, right? Like Nature and that stuff, and all these newer journals, right? And I was like, yes, right? And of course, she's missing, and she probably is legitimately missing this. When they submitted to the good journals, they got kicked out. They didn't get in all the journals. They didn't get in any of the good journals, right? And I said, yeah, but they just rewrote Mein Kampf. Like they didn't try to do anything, right? You might as well have picked random stuff, right? And they would publish it. Now, that was after the whole discussion about, well, Elon doesn't understand what he's doing. You can't slash the university's percentage to 15%. How are they going to be able to provide things? And I'm sitting there staring at her like, because I know this, she gets grants. I'm like, so you don't want more money for the grant that you wrote, that you put all the work into, and that you're going to do all the work for? That's your argument. You don't want more money. And you know what her counter argument was? No word of a lie. Here's her counter argument. Well, when I went, because she's done a couple of these grants, she's written a couple of books in sociology on the gig economy, I guess. So she said, well, when I got to the school and I was working on the grants, and I don't have a secretary. I don't have anybody to do my photocopies. And I'm sitting there like, oh yeah, wow, that's really rough. No one to do your photocopying. Like, please. I never had anybody do my photocopying ever in 35 years of employment. So whatever, right? And then, and now this was when she first got there. Doge happened what? A month ago, right? This whole thing with the cutting 15%, is that a month? It hasn't even taken effect yet, right? It hasn't taken effect. And she says, how's the school going to afford what they're doing? And I'm like, they already didn't give you a secretary. What are they going to do? Not give you 2 secretaries? You'll still have 0 secretaries. You'll just have more money from your grant. Why are you against this? This benefits you, right? Now, zoom out just a little bit. Well, there's all these bad publications, right? There's all these bad publications. We pay a fortune for them because we already agreed on that, right there. And I told her, I said, they're stealing all the money, right? They're criminals. They're taking money. They shouldn't be charging anything for this nonsense. Well, if we cut the schools down to 15% for the grants, maybe they'll stop spending money on those guys who we agree, although she didn't officially agree, are corrupt. No realization whatsoever. None. All she said was, well, if you cut that, I mean, I know it's all administrators and that's bad, but also they're not going to fire the administrators. And I was kind of like, well, good, let the schools go out of business if they don't want to fire the people who aren't doing work. Like, why is this a problem? But no progress, none, 0, zip, no realization, no connection at all between these things. She just can't do it. She's in sociology. I'm like, oh man, this is like, if anybody should be able to make connections like that, it's somebody in sociology, I would think. I mean, I don't know much about sociology, but this is
sociology. I mean, you're reminding me of the fact that Clara kind of disappeared and we don't know what's up with her. She was supposed to be back in February.
She got busy. I talked to her a bit. She got a little busy.
Yeah, apparently your cousins are a lot sillier than my cousins, because my cousins are just involved in real world stuff, so they don't pay attention to any of this shit.
Yeah, most of my cousins are involved in real world stuff and don't pay attention to any of it. But
and I don't think that's silly at all.
No, that I mean, I think it's silly in a good way, right? Like most people cannot make sense of global things, like ever. They will never have the ability to do so, no matter how much information you give them or how much knowledge they have. That's like 99.9% of all the people. And most of what we're suffering from is people are trying to understand things that they have no chance ever of understanding. Like there's never going to be a world where they're going to get an understanding of that. Now, can they get a good enough description of it to survive in the world no matter what happens? Absolutely they can. That's the story of human history up until this point, where suddenly everyone's an individual. And I was talking to Sally about this earlier on my Discord server. The implication from being an individual is that you actually do have to understand large chunks of the world in order to function. That's just never been true, and it still isn't true. But that's like, it's an inference that you have to make if you think you're an individual. Like, you just need to understand all these things that are never going to affect you. Why? Because you don't know, unless you understand them, if they're going to affect you. So it's kind of a trap of flooding yourself with stuff that, you know, will never help. I mean, one of the things I really liked was when you were on the CBAC stream there, and you and I forget who it was, said like, well, you know, I'm paraphrasing, like, how do I get into ARC, or how do I get up on stage at ARC? And you were like, no, like, why? That's not your place. And that's but if you're an individual, and it's a valid question, I agree with you, it's a dumb question, but Like if you're trying to be an individual, yeah, you kind of have to understand art to a degree that you probably can't.
So for me, it's actually relevant that back February last year, I said Biden is not going to be the Democratic nominee at the election. And the day before the election, I said Donald Trump is going to win the popular vote.
Right.
And what's relevant about that is that just from the information sources which I have, which are supposedly far, far worse than the information sources and resources, etc. For example, Nate Silver has.
No, but they're not. Like that's the problem. Like this is the problem. Like it's funny too because so when Nate Silver made the disastrous prediction in the first Trump election, right? He went back and said, he actually said, like I think it was a month or two later, he said, "Oh yeah, I did not update my prediction based on the data that I had." Okay, so he already admitted, like, I ignored the data. He ignored the data. It happens, right? It happens. Among other things, I'm a data scientist. Boy, I've made that mistake. It's an easy mistake to make where you don't update, and it's very hard to update, especially if you're not familiar with. And this is why John Vervaeke's work is so important. If you're not familiar with relevance realization, updating gets really hard, right? Because once you have momentum in an information system, the update cost is, 2 or 3 orders of magnitude lower than the cost to acquire not only the data, but the understanding of the data that allows you to update without having to redo your work, right? And so once you sort of understand it, like that works in software engineering. Like when you're dealing with, we'll say, half a gig a second incoming pipe of data, right? Like once you have so much data to draw from, which there's a startup cost, the way you handle the new data coming in changes completely. You need completely different code to do it, right? You might run that side by side or whatever, but like everything changes, right? Because of scale and because of relevance realization. And Nate Silver oversamples everything. And what he doesn't understand is that more sampling, especially on polls, gives you a worse picture of what's going on. What you want are the fewest number of polls possible to get the widest representation in a data sample. And that is a very hard thing to do. Polling is subject to all kinds of sample bias that even the quote experts in the field actually don't understand. And this, this gets back, and they also don't understand the statistics. That's where Taleb is right. And I think Taleb also understands the data sampling problem, although I don't think I've ever heard him talk about it. But he clearly understands it. So when you oversample any polling, and it's not polling, any type of sampling that's done too often on the wrong data set, right, or with a wrong data filter, just results in a bias. And the bias gets stronger the more data samples you take. And so you get further and further away from the truth effectively. And if you add to that poor statistics, then you're really screwed. Like you really have to understand in political polling, Republicans never answer polls except when significant events happen. So that could be after a primary, right? It could be after a debate, right? But it's never in between those sorts of things. And there's one or two other things. I don't remember them all anymore because I've never done that work. I couldn't possibly care less. But my way of picking things works way better than the polls anyway. So if you don't understand the sample bias, right, and you try to do like a running poll, like the other thing people don't understand is polling people week on week on their vote is dumb. That's all bias because people don't change their mind that quickly on politics ever. And the interesting thing is, if you read the psychological work on that, you would know that, right? But nobody reads the psychological white papers on this stuff. But yeah, sampling like in the middle of the month and between events in general, you just get a bunch of noise, and you just add that to the polls. And so it's fewer polls, but broader scope gives you better data. And that data doesn't change very much, but you have to know all that. And people don't know that. Even quote people in the industry. And to some extent, Jacob, I'll tell you this because I know this for a fact. Some of the people that do know that will never talk about it because they've got a secret sauce and they've got their predictions and their predictions are right. And they really don't want to tell anybody why their predictions are wrong. And I honestly don't blame them. Right. And we don't necessarily have access to that. And if you thought Nate Silver was one of them, I mean, I found out about the guy from his book, and I love his book. I love his work. I mean, I knew he was off his rails on the politics because I just looked at the right polls and I was like, he's way off. He doesn't even understand how far off he is. And yeah, I mean, my prediction was dead on. So poor Nate Silver, but also he made a classic set of errors. He made 3 different errors. And I think he also screwed up a statistic here and there too, but it's been too long. I don't remember. This is what I mean. Like most people can't do that. Most people can't do that. The number of people that can do any data science at all is vanishingly small. It's a bit like good software engineers. Like we have lots of software engineers and almost all of them are terrible and should really be doing something else for a living because they suck. And we've flooded academia in the same way, right? I mean, my cousin's fairly smart. She's way above average. No one in my family is average or below intelligence, believe me. But like, she can't be doing what she's doing, you know, and it's probably just overload. She's probably just tracking too many things as a sociologist and can't make connections anymore because when you get overloaded with information, relationships suffer. The relationality of things goes out of your brain. You get what I call cognitively overloaded. And of course, I have videos of all this on navigating patterns, right? And when you get cognitively overloaded, the first thing that goes is the complex relationships between things. So you can add facts, but you're deleting relationships. You're deleting, it's not qualia per se, because it's double-ended qualia or something, right? Because a relationship is not merely qualia. It's actually a bunch of qualias sort of combined. And so you lose the way to navigate in favor of having more information. And that's just a flood. That's what people are suffering from.
Well, I have been going for almost 5 hours now. And I do have work to do. And yeah, I'm glad somebody's enjoying this. I think I am going to sign off. Were there any last words you wanted to leave us with, Mark?
Well, look, Jacob, I sympathize with the need for sense making, right? I think the problem with sense making is that people are trying to make sense of things that they cannot ever make sense of and make sense of the important things at the same time. And we've lost that distinction. And that is why you need to focus more locally in general. And then if, you know, once you've got that kind of down, it's sort of the clean your room approach that Peterson talks about in 12 Rules, then maybe you can start to worry about the things that are like not in your immediate neighborhood, for example. And online makes that very, very hard, right? Because we're constantly being flooded with distractions and things from all over the place that, you know, I mean, to some extent, I talked to Sally Joe and she's way in South Dakota. And as much as I love it there, you know, well, it's a long way away. So I don't need to worry about what's going on there. I know way more about what's going on in rural South Dakota than I ever thought I would. That's for sure. So yeah, just focus locally. Your sense making will get easier when you try to make sense of things that are closer to you.
Okay. I'm going to use host's prerogative to put the Reverend Parcells to bed because he does need to get up in the morning.
Sorry, Reverend. Thank you.
But before he goes, I have a question. Let's say, God forbid, that I were to burn somebody at the stake for not being a Trinitarian. and I did not repent of that. Is that a salvation issue?
Sometimes Jacob takes
There's a
that devil's
proverb.
advocate thing too
Isn't there
far.
a proverb that says something like "Don't answer a fool according to his folly."
But there's a proverb that says answer a fool according to his folly.
There is.
Exactly right. I'm going to leave it to you guys to determine, which of those was applicable in this situation as I go. So, but anyhow, good.
Thank you, Reverend.
Good to
Thank
chat
you.
with you all.
Thank you.
Good night.
The